The note fell from Isabella Martinelli's trembling fingers at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in Carnegie Hall Studio 2. She'd sung for presidents, performed at La Scala, commanded standing ovations across 3 continents. But in that moment, after hearing a 20-year-old girl from Newark sing Ave Maria without reading a single note, Isabella Martinelli couldn't remember why she'd ever opened her mouth to sing at all. If you love stories about raw talent meeting trained perfection, hit that subscribe button now. Because what happened in that studio changed both women's lives forever. It was February 1985, and Clive Davis had a problem. His new artist, Whitney Houston, had the voice of an angel and the star power to match. But the classical music establishment was dismissive. Gospel singer, they'd whisper. Church girl who got lucky. Clive needed validation from the classical world. So he made a call to the most respected vocal coach in New York, someone who could assess Whitney's technique with authority that couldn't be questioned. That's how Isabella Martinelli ended up walking into Studio 2 that cold Tuesday afternoon. Isabella was 53 years old and at the peak of her career, Juilliard trained, with a 4-octave range and impeccable technique honed over 40 years of disciplined practice. She'd studied in Milan, performed in Vienna, and taught master classes to aspiring opera singers who paid thousands for her expertise. She arrived at Carnegie Hall with her leather portfolio containing 40 years of performance notes, breathing diagrams, and vowel placement charts. Everything documented, everything measured, everything perfect. Miss Martinelli, thank you for coming, Clive Davis said, extending his hand in the studio's control room. Mr. Davis, Isabella replied, her Italian accent still strong despite decades in America. I must tell you, I'm not sure why you need my assessment. Gospel singers are wonderful for what they do, but classical technique is a different discipline entirely. Clive smiled. That's exactly why I wanted you to hear her. No preconceptions, just your professional opinion. Isabella set down her portfolio. Where is she? In the vocal booth. She's been warming up for about 20 minutes. Through the glass, Isabella could see a young black woman in jeans in a simple white blouse, her eyes closed, humming scales. She's not reading the warm-up exercises? Isabella asked, noticing the absence of sheet music. Whitney doesn't read music, Clive said carefully. She learned everything by ear in church. Isabella's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She cannot read music. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. Many gospel singers learn that way, Clive said. Doesn't make them less. Mr. Davis, Isabella interrupted gently but firmly. There is a difference between singing and being a vocalist. One is feeling, the other is craft. Without reading music, without understanding theory, one can be a performer but never an artist. The studio door opened. Whitney Houston walked in, smiling warmly. Hi, I'm Whitney, she said, extending her hand. Isabella shook it briefly. Isabella Martinelli, I'm here to assess your vocal technique. Oh, I know who you are, Whitney said with genuine excitement. My mom has your recordings. Your Puccini arias are incredible. Isabella softened slightly. Your mother has good taste. She trained you? My mom's Sissy Houston. She sings gospel, backup for Aretha, Elvis, a lot of people. She taught me in church. Church, Isabella repeated. She pulled out a sheet of music from her portfolio. Have you ever sung Ave Maria? Whitney nodded. Yes, ma'am. Beautiful piece. This arrangement is from Schubert. Very technical, requires proper breath support, vowel modification, sustained legato phrasing. Isabella placed the sheet music on the stand. Let's start with this. Show me what you can do with structured classical repertoire. Whitney looked at the sheet music, then back at Isabella. I can't read this. You cannot read music at all? No, ma'am. In church, we just learn by listening and feeling it. Isabella's smile was patient but carried the weight of 40 years of disciplined study. Church singing is emotional, very powerful for spiritual purposes, but classical music requires precision, technique. You cannot simply feel your way through Schubert. Maybe you could sing it once? Whitney suggested. Then I could. That would defeat the purpose of the assessment, Isabella interrupted. Classical vocalists must be able to sight read, to understand notation, to execute based on the composer's written intentions. An uncomfortable silence filled the studio. Clive Davis cleared his throat. Isabella, what if we approach this differently? Why don't we just let Whitney sing Ave Maria the way she knows it? Then you can identify what needs work. Isabella hesitated. This wasn't proper assessment protocol, but she was curious. Very well, she said, removing the sheet music. Sing it however you learned it. Whitney closed her eyes for a moment, taking a breath. What key would you like? You choose, Isabella said, settling into a chair. If you're not reading the arrangement, key doesn't matter. Whitney positioned herself in front of the microphone. No warm-up scales, no technique exercises, just silence. And then, Ave Maria. The first note emerged pure and clear, filling the studio with a tone that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than vocal cords. Isabella's fingers, which had been casually holding a pen to make notes, stopped moving. Whitney continued, her voice climbing effortlessly through the melody. No sheet music, no technical study, just the song pouring out of her, with a naturalness that defied analysis. Isabella had sung Ave Maria hundreds of times. She knew every breath mark, every dynamic shading, every precisely calculated vowel modification for optimal resonance. She had spent months perfecting her interpretation, studying recordings of legendary sopranos, measuring her breath capacity to sustain the long phrases. What Whitney was doing was technically imperfect. Her vowels weren't modified according to classical Italian standards. Her breath support, while strong, wasn't the structured diaphragmatic technique Isabella taught. But something else was happening. When Isabella sang Ave Maria, audiences applauded the technical mastery. When Whitney sang it, something in the room shifted. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Whitney reached the climactic phrase, her voice soaring with an ease that made Isabella's carefully constructed technique feel suddenly mechanical. It wasn't about the notes anymore. It was about something Isabella had spent 40 years trying to achieve and never quite grasped, complete unself-conscious surrender to the music. The final note sustained, pure and unwavering, then faded to silence. Whitney opened her eyes. Was that okay? Isabella couldn't speak. Clive Davis leaned forward. Isabella, your thoughts? Isabella stood up slowly. Her hands were shaking, and she pressed them against her portfolio to hide it. That was, she started, then stopped. Her voice, usually so controlled, was catching in her throat. Excuse me. She walked quickly toward the studio door. Isabella, Clive called after her, concerned. I need a moment, she said, not turning around. She made it to the hallway before the tears came. For 40 years, Isabella Martinelli had pursued perfection. She'd studied with the greatest teachers, practiced 8 hours a day, analyzed every great soprano's technique. She'd learned 7 languages to sing opera in their native tongues with perfect diction. She'd sacrificed relationships, missed family gatherings, declined social invitations, all in service of her craft. She was perfect, technically flawless, and until 3 minutes ago, she'd thought that mattered. What Whitney had just done wasn't perfect. By every classical standard Isabella had spent her life upholding, it was technically imprecise, but it was real in a way Isabella's performances had never been. Isabella had learned to sing Ave Maria as a prayer. Whitney simply prayed it. The studio door opened. Whitney stepped into the hallway, concerned. Miss Martinelli, are you okay? Isabella quickly wiped her eyes. I'm fine, thank you. Did I do something wrong? Whitney asked gently. I can try it differently. No. Isabella's voice was sharp, then softened. No, you did nothing wrong. It was beautiful. Then why are you crying? Isabella looked at this young woman with her natural gift, her church training, her complete lack of classical education, and felt 40 years of certainty crumbling. Because, Isabella said quietly, you just showed me that I've spent my entire life learning to do something you already know how to do without trying. Whitney shook her head. That's not true. You're amazing. Your technique, Isabella interrupted with a bitter laugh. Yes, I have perfect technique. I can tell you exactly which muscles to engage for optimal breath support. I can diagram vowel placement for maximum resonance. I can analyze harmonic structure and execute dynamic shadings with mathematical precision. She paused, fresh tears forming. But you know what I can't do? I can't make people feel what I just felt listening to you, because somewhere in all those years of learning how to sing correctly, I forgot why we sing at all. The hallway was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic outside. Miss Martinelli, Whitney said softly, my mama always says there's church singing and there's technical singing. Both are gifts. You have yours, I have mine. Your mother is wise, Isabella said, but she's also wrong. What you have isn't just a gift. It's the thing every trained singer spends their life trying to recapture, the ability to be completely present in the music without thinking about how you're doing it. She picked up her portfolio, which she dropped in the hallway. I came here to assess whether you had proper technique, to tell Mr. Davis whether you needed classical training. Isabella smiled sadly. The truth is, if you took classical training, you might lose what makes you extraordinary. I don't think that's true, Whitney said. Couldn't I learn technique without losing the feeling? Perhaps you could, Isabella admitted, but I've seen it happen too many times. Singers who start with pure emotion, then learn all the rules, and their performances become demonstrations of skill rather than acts of expression. She started toward the exit, then stopped. Whitney, may I give you one piece of advice? Not as a vocal coach, but as someone who just learned something important from you? Of course. Don't let anyone teach you to sing correctly if it means singing less honestly. The world has enough technically perfect singers. We need voices that tell the truth. Isabella Martinelli left Carnegie Hall that afternoon and went home to her Upper West Side apartment. She canceled her evening master class, something she'd never done in 30 years of teaching. For the next week, she couldn't sing, not because of physical injury or illness. She simply couldn't make herself do it. Every time she approached her piano to practice, she remembered Whitney's effortless Ave Maria and felt her own voice lock up. Her manager called, concerned. She had a performance scheduled at Lincoln Center in 10 days. I'm not ready, Isabella told him. Not ready? Isabella, you've sung that repertoire 100 times. That's the problem, she said, and hung up. On the 8th day, she sat at her piano and did something she hadn't done in 40 years. She sang without thinking about technique. She sang Ave Maria not as an exercise in classical perfection, but as what it actually was, a prayer. Her technique was still there, all those years of training embedded in muscle memory. But this time, she let the feeling lead and the technique follow. When she finished, she was crying again. But this time, they were different tears. Isabella Martinelli performed at Lincoln Center 10 days later. Critics noted something different in her interpretation, a new emotional depth they'd never heard before. She never told anyone what had changed, but in her private studio, she kept a small handwritten note taped to her mirror. Technique serves truth, never the reverse. Years later, when Whitney Houston became one of the best-selling artists of all time, Isabella would sometimes hear "I Will Always Love You" on the radio. And every time she would smile and remember the day a church girl who couldn't read music taught an opera singer what singing actually meant. Isabella changed her teaching philosophy after that day. She still taught technique, breath support, vowel placement, proper resonance, but she started every lesson with a question. Why do you want to sing? If students said to be perfect or to show skill, she knew they'd end up like her, technically flawless and emotionally distant. If they said, because I have to, or because music needs to exist in the world, she knew they might have what Whitney had. The note that fell from Isabella's fingers that Tuesday afternoon was never picked up. It stayed on the studio floor, a piece of sheet music for Ave Maria that neither woman needed. Because the real lesson learned that day wasn't written in any notation. It was simple. You can spend 40 years learning to do something perfectly, or you can spend 40 seconds doing it truthfully. Whitney Houston chose truth, and in doing so, she freed Isabella Martinelli to finally do the same.